good morning in England and good afternoon in Indonesia. This is the first podcast in this year. So we have a speaker from North Bali Reef Conservation, Mr. Boakes. Yeah. And before that, please welcoming speak from IPB representative with Mr. Beginner Subhan. Okay, Mr. Beginner Subhan, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Natih. Good morning, Zah. Good afternoon, friends. And I'm very happy. We start again our scores in 2023. First, thank you very much for the organizer, who prepared the scores for this year's. And as you know, scores is like a platform for people all over Indonesia, and also we now try to open scores for the regional practitioner, researcher, or all the people who interest in doing coral reef restoration. So this platform, we hope we can share our knowledge, our experience, so we can so after that we can find the best way for a coral reef restoration. So we can choose what based on our experience, how not only the method for the coral restoration, also any kind activity that support coral reef restoration, like social, economy, and also our last speaker from Polynesia, they have business process who support the coral reef restoration. So in our discussion, our thank you very much for Zah Boakes from now in England. So I'm very happy you joined this seminar, and I think I saw some friends who always join, Pak Augie from Brin, Mas Idris, Joanna, people Coral Catch awardee and organizer. Thank you very much for coming. I think for people this discussion open for everyone who want to share. So please contact us if you interest to share the your experience related to coral restoration. And once again, thank you very much, and I hope this sharing today from Zah, who work a lot of work in Bali, can give us insight about the restoration in Bali and Indonesia. Thank you very much, Pak Natih.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bagian.
Okay, hi everyone. So before I start, I just wanted to say, I think these presentations always work really well if we make it as interactive as possible. So please do feel free to stop me at any point and ask me questions, or if something's not clear or if you do not understand, please just ask me and I'd be more than happy to share and explain something more. I see we have a broad range of people joining today from not just within Indonesia, but also outside of Indonesia as well. So that's great. So thanks everyone for tuning in and checking out this presentation. I hope you will find it interesting and informative. So my presentation today is on coral reef conservation management and research in Bali. And I'm Boakes, the co-founder of an NGO called North Bali Reef Conservation. And I'm also a PhD student at Bournemouth University. And I'm currently at Bournemouth University right now. I'm doing some short project on campus, and I aim to be back in Indonesia next month in February. So this session is going to be broken up into two parts. The first is going to be on coral reef conservation management, specifically with regards to my experience in Bali and my NGO, North Bali Reef Conservation. And the second part is going to be on coral conservation research. And this is more related to the research I've been doing and my findings and outputs. I'm going to leave time at the end as well for questions, and I always enjoy good discussions and good questions. So please do feel free to save some questions for the end as well, and it'd be my pleasure to discuss them with you. So I'm the co-founder of an NGO called North Bali Reef Conservation, and in a few minutes' time, I'm going to be telling you more about that. I'm also a PhD student at Bournemouth University, and Bournemouth University is a university in the south of England. It's currently very cold here. It's -3 degrees, and I was cycling into campus this morning, wishing I was in tropical Bali. So yeah, not such a great place this time of year. So to start my presentation, just to make sure we're all on the same page and have the same understanding, I'm just going to give a brief overview of coral reefs. So coral reefs are often described as the rainforests of the ocean. And that's not surprising because they host such a vast amount of marine biodiversity, despite the fact that they only cover a very small amount, 0.1% of the ocean floor. But they host around 25% of the world's marine species, which is just crazy if you think about how such a small amount of area can host such a large amount of biodiversity. And I'm based in Bali, and Bali is an island within Indonesia. And Indonesia sits within the Coral Triangle, which is an area within the Pacific that is recognized for global marine biodiversity. And within Bali, we have some of the highest biodiversity in Indonesia. And a recent study in 2013 showed that there's at least 805 reef fish species. There's probably a lot more that we don't know about right now. But that in itself is a huge amount of reef fish just within the island of Bali and its surrounding islands, the Nusa Islands as well. And this photo here on the right was taken from some of our recent photo quadrat sampling in Karangasem, which is where my project is based in northeast Bali. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about coral reef threats, and these are global. There's some more specific threats to Indonesia and also to Bali, but just more globally, some of the main threats to coral reefs around the world include bleaching. Bleaching is arguably the most significant threat to coral reef biodiversity globally. And actually, I'll be explaining this more later in my presentation. Pollution, this could be in the form of chemical pollution, plastic pollution, nutrient enrichment, coral disease, overfishing, illegal fishing. So illegal fishing can be anything from dynamite fishing, cyanide fishing, certain types of fish trawling. Again, it really depends on the area where the practice is taking place and what the specific regulations are. Physical damage to coral reefs. Okay, so some of the main threats to Bali's reefs, and this has been highlighted through our research and also from just going diving and scuba diving and seeing some of the main threats here. So the first is physical damage, and physical damage basically comes as a result of anything which physically breaks the corals. So this could be boats and the anchors that they put down on coral reefs. It could be destructive fishing practices like bomb or cyanide fishing. And it could be scuba divers as well. And unfortunately, in some regions of Bali, and indeed other parts of the world as well, we've seen that scuba diving can be harmful if it's not well managed. Second is plastic pollution. This is quite self-explanatory, I suppose. It's a big issue again around the world's oceans, not just in Bali, but it's something that we have an ongoing problem with at our site in North Bali. And finally, coral bleaching. So coral bleaching is basically, and I'll explain this fairly simply, is when the zooxanthellae, the photosynthetic algae living within the coral polyps tissue, is expelled. And it's expelled when the corals become stressed as a result of multiple reasons. Two of the main reasons why corals might become stressed is coral is ocean acidification and ocean warming. So they're both as a result of climate change, and ocean acidification is when as our atmosphere becomes more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the carbon is absorbed into the ocean and becomes carbonic acid. And as a consequence, our oceans are becoming more acidic. And this causes some corals to become stressed and as a result become bleached. And the second is ocean warming. So as a result of climate change as well, this increased temperature causes the corals to become stressed and bleach as a result of it. Reefs around Bali and Indonesia have experienced varying degrees of coral bleaching, some quite heavily affected, some much less affected. But overall, it is a concern for our reefs. Okay, everyone, so now this is the doom and gloom, the negative part of the presentation over. And I hope that now my presentation will be more positive, because we're going to be talking about conservation and the work that we can do to restore degraded reefs around Bali and around Indonesia. So my NGO, I'm the co-founder of this NGO, and it's called North Bali Reef Conservation. And we're a volunteer organization that works with fisher communities in North Bali to restore coral reef ecosystems for the sustainable local livelihoods. Our NGO was founded in 2017, so about 5 years ago now. And the aim was basically to restore an area of reef that got degraded in the past. So we're working in a very large area that used to have very healthy coral reefs, but our local co-founder, Ketut, my NGO partner, who grew up in Tianyar, the village where we work, discovered that the reefs that he remembered as a child unfortunately became degraded several decades ago. And what used to be a vast, biodiverse, healthy coral reef unfortunately became degraded as a result of destructive fishing practices, coral mining, boat anchoring, and et cetera, and as a result, the reef that he remembered unfortunately was no longer, and it was just basically covered with flat sand area with very, very little marine biodiversity. And as an organization, our aim was to rebuild this area of reef, mostly using artificial reefs, to bring this biodiversity back. So we're working in a quite isolated, degraded area, but where we're based in Tianyar, North Bali, the reefs are very healthy, and we have some very biodiverse, healthy reefs within the area. So we know that the area that we're trying to restore has high potential to be a biodiverse reef again. And that's one of the reasons why we started our program, is to try and support life and restore the area so that we have more biodiversity again. So our program works with international volunteers and also local fishermen, and the local fishermen play a very important part in our program. Since the start in 2017, the local fishermen have been essential in helping us set up our program, working with us every day, and also working alongside our fantastic international volunteers. And we receive volunteers all year round, perhaps slightly less right now in the rainy season, but we have a fairly consistent flow of volunteers all year round, and also from all over. We get volunteers from Europe, from the UK, like myself, from America, and lots of other countries as well. So we're really grateful to have this international support and also this local community support as well. So our organization has quite a few projects, but arguably the main project and our main aim is, as I said, to restore this area of reef. And One of the main ways we do this is by building artificial reefs. So our artificial reefs, you can see the photo on the right with the two divers carrying the reefs. We call them roti buaya, so crocodile bread. And the aim of the reefs are to basically provide a habitat for marine life in the area. So that can be mobile marine life, so fish, turtles, and sharks, etc., etc. But it's also to support benthic life as well. So sponges, of course, corals, and other types of species that rely on the hard substrate provided by the artificial reef. So we aim to build these artificial reefs very rough to allow colonization of corals and other benthic life, and also with a lot of protective space. So the structures have got holes and caves and tunnels. And this is to allow shelter for types of organisms that need this protective space, again, like fish. So I wanted to show you a short video now. And this video is just to give you a bit of context to our program and what it looks like underwater. So we've now built around 10,000 artificial reef structures, and we're still building them. So we still have a very large area, which is still degraded and not covered in artificial reefs yet. So I wanted to share with you a video that shows the difference between our flat sand area and our artificial reef. So 1 second, I'll just get this video up. I hope you can all see it. If you can't see it, let me know. So as you can see, our artificial reefs have supported a lot of life and have really brought a lot of marine biodiversity back to the area we're working in. So I hope that was a good way for you to visualize and how for you to see what the project looks like underwater, of course. So we don't just build artificial reefs at North Bali Reef Conservation. We've got a few different projects as well, a few different other projects. And one of these is turtle conservation. So we're based in Tian Yad, and Tian Yad has a long 3-kilometer reef, 3-kilometer sandy beach, which is ideal for nesting turtles, mostly olive ridley, but also sometimes hawksbill turtles as well. Sand is soft and it's very suitable for these nesting turtles. However, unfortunately, like many other places in Indonesia and indeed globally, these beaches have threats, and these nests are exposed to threats from the local community in the form of poachers, boats, and also dogs as well. So unfortunately, not all these eggs are safe, and quite often they will be taken out or destroyed, which is a real shame because some of the species we're working with are vulnerable turtles. So they need basically all the support they can get. So since we started in 2017, local people started bringing us the nests instead because they knew that at our site they would be kept safe. And we now have a turtle hatching area where we basically keep the eggs safe. We dig them back into the ground and keep them safe. And then usually after around 50 days, the hatchlings hatch and we release them straight to the ocean alongside the local community, local children, local fishers, and of course our international volunteers as well. So every time we have a nest hatching, it's a great community event because we're bringing together lots of different people to witness this really beautiful release of turtle hatchlings. And people always really enjoy being involved in these projects. So that's great. So the season is usually between May through to around July or August. And during this time, we get quite a lot of nests. I think last year we had around 25 nests. and each nest has anything between 50 to 100 eggs in it. So there's a lot of hatchlings released over the year. Alongside our turtle conservation project, we're also running plastic education, cleanup and recycling programs. So we have a plastic recycling center, and we're also running beach cleans with local children every Thursday from a nearby school. And the aim is to educate local people about plastic awareness and reduction, because single-use plastics are still a big issue in the area where we're based. So we're trying to educate people about not using single-use plastics where it's possible, and how to sustainably dispose of your plastics. Yes. And we also back in 2017, when our organization started, established a community marine protected area. So this was actually established by the local fisherman group, Kelompok Yowana Bakti Segadat. And basically this loosely translates to youth protecting their ocean. And the aim is that this fisherman group wanted to start to do work to restore their nearby reef, and nobody was forcing them to. It was down to their own desires and their own interests in supporting local marine conservation. So these fishers established a locally enforced, locally established marine protected area. And within this area, it's no fishing zone. And the area is patrolled regularly, and is one of the reasons why we've experienced such a great comeback in marine biodiversity, because they're not exposed to threats from fishing. So it's really great to see the support and dedication from this community that work with us every day. So that's enough about my NGO, North Bali Reef Conservation. I'm going to give a brief overview of some do's and don'ts for starting a conservation program. And this can specifically apply to coral reef conservation in Indonesia, but it can also be broader as well if you have other interests in conservation, perhaps terrestrial conservation, or any other types of biodiversity restoration work. This, I hope, will be interesting and informative for you. So first, do involve the community in your conservation work. This is probably the most important thing that I've found, and that we've all found from coral conservation, is you need to involve the community in the work you're doing, because otherwise the threats that often are exposed to the reefs do not reside. They will persist if the community are putting additional threats on the reef. So as much as possible, involving the community in your conservation work, and ideally making them part of the conservation work too. By engaging communities in projects like this, we've shown that it really is effective in bringing them on board and making them truly interested and passionate about coral conservation. And that's one thing that we found. So yes, involving the coral community in the conservation work is very, very important. Next, do expect the unexpected. So that's a bit of a mouthful to say, but hopefully that makes sense. And what I'm saying by that is, when we first founded North Bali Reef Conservation back 5 years ago, there were many things that I expected and how I planned the project to go. And many of these expectations did not happen at all. And many things that I was not expecting to happen did happen. So my advice would be to, in English, we would say, go in the flow, go with the flow. So try to support as much as you can, but also expect the unexpected as well. Next is, do take the time to experiment with new ideas. So I've included this photo here on the right, which is us experimenting with a new type of coral transplantation method, which we used on our artificial reef. And we've experimented with many different ideas, not just with regards to coral transplantation, but with regards to plastic recycling or local education or artificial reef design. And many of the ideas that we've experimented haven't worked, and they've been unsuccessful. But we've had some that have worked and that have been successful. And I'm so pleased to be here today to discuss these with you. So yeah, do take the time to experiment with new ideas, and also don't be disheartened if the ideas don't work. Okay, so moving on to don'ts now. Do not underestimate the importance of monitoring and maintenance. Unfortunately, many marine conservation projects around the world, they get set up, they get established. For example, artificial reefs are put in the ocean and then they're just left. They're not maintained and they're not monitored. And this is a real shame because this would never happen with a terrestrial, a land-based project. For example, the development of a national park. Park managers would never designate a national park on land and then just leave it. It would require maintenance and monitoring. And this is the same with marine conservation projects as well and coral conservation projects. It's very important that the reefs are maintained and also monitored through research projects. Next is don't underestimate the knowledge of local people. So I've been doing my PhD now I'm in my 3rd year, focused on coral conservation in Indonesia. But despite this and all this research I've done, I seem to be shocked so often by how much the local people know in terms of marine ecology, especially local fishes. And this local knowledge has been really important for our program and for helping us get to where we are and for the success of our project. So like I said, it's really important to involve the community in the conservation work and also utilize the knowledge that they have because it's really useful and really important. And finally, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. So quite often setting up new projects like this involves being out of your comfort zone. An example for me was being put into a government meeting in Indonesian at the very start of our project. So I think I'd been learning Bahasa Indonesia for a couple of weeks, and I was put into the meeting trying to have a conversation with people from the government with very, very poor language skills. And it was interesting for me to be out of my comfort zone there. And by being out of your comfort zone in these sort of situations, it's how you allow yourself and also your organization to develop. So yeah, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. Okay, so part 2 of this presentation now is going to be focused more on marine research and coral reef conservation research. And I'm going to be talking specifically about my PhD. So my PhD, like I said, I'm the 3rd year of my PhD, and it's assessing the ecological and socioeconomic benefits of coral reef conservation in Bali, Indonesia. And the aim of my PhD is to assess the extent to which coral conservation programs in Bali can lead to results which mimic natural ecological communities, ecosystem processes, and ecosystem services that occur on coral reefs. And that sounds like quite a lot of words and maybe is a bit complicated, but basically the aim of my PhD is to look at how well artificial reef programs and coral reef conservation programs can lead to benefits that lead to ecological benefits and also socioeconomic benefits. So my research team involves multiple researchers from the UK and also Indonesia. So I work with Professor Rick Stafford and Dr. Alice Hall, who are 2 marine biologists from the UK, and they're also my PhD supervisors. And then from researchers within Bali, I work with Dr. Agung Suryaputra from Undiksa. I work with Pak Ketut. He is my local co-founder from Tianyar. I work with Dr. Mayuni from Undiknas and Pak Pras, Dr. Prasetyo from Dianapoda. And it's great to have all of these different researchers involved in my project because every researcher has got different skills and different experience. And by bringing all of these researchers together and utilizing their individual skills from marine geochemistry to social science through to coral biology, by bringing all of these unique skills together, it forms a fantastic and really interesting research project. So I'm great and lucky to be able to be involved with all of these fantastic researchers. So one of the most important questions that I'm trying to answer is, can artificial reefs effectively restore degraded coral reef communities? This is the the million-dollar question for my PhD. And basically, one of the main ways I did this, specifically looking at fish biodiversity, is I used remote underwater video. It's often called RUV, R-U-V. And basically it involves deploying an underwater camera in different areas of Reef for 25 minutes at a time. So you deploy the camera, you can scuba dive or free dive and place the camera down in the sand. And then you leave the camera, so you go off. I would go back to the beach or go snorkeling further away so that you're not interrupting species in the area. And then after 25 minutes, you will come back. You will collect the camera and then analyze the footage. So you would look at maximum number of fish species within the recording, and also what species there are there. So you're looking at max N, max number of species, and max D, maximum diversity. So basically this gives you two metrics to work with. You're working with marine biodiversity and marine abundance. And they're two really useful bits of information to have if you're analyzing reef health. So I looked at marine biodiversity and marine abundance in 3 different habitats. A coral reef, which you can see is A, an artificial reef, B, and a flat sandy area, C. And yes, within the sandy area, you can see garden eels, which are coming out of the water, coming out of the sand, sorry. So I deployed an underwater camera 18 times in each habitat type for 25 minutes. So it took a lot of analysis to go through the footage. But overall, it was really useful because it allowed us to get a publication which looked at how marine biodiversity was, how biodiversity and abundance is different between habitat types, and also how it varies over time. So the publication that we published in 2022 showed that the marine number of species, so marine biodiversity, was increasing over time on the artificial reefs. So this is really interesting. You can look at the diagram here on the left to see that in more detail, and you can see how each year number of species is increasing on the artificial reefs. And that's really interesting because the research project has only lasted for 3 years. So we don't know when the increase in number of species is going to plateau. It could be in the next year, or it could be several more years. But as you can see, we're getting a consistent increase in biodiversity. So that's really interesting. And in terms of fish biodiversity, we found that the artificial reef was ecologically equivalent and therefore not significantly different from a nearby natural coral reef. So that's great because we now know that it's not exactly the same, but basically the artificial reefs are doing a very good job of mimicking natural coral reef communities. So that's really interesting. So this is one of the statistical analysis diagrams that came out of the research that we were doing for this same publication. And it looks a bit complicated, and I'll try and explain it as simply as I can. So you can basically see 3 main colored dots within the diagram. You can see the red, pinky, the pinky and the purple ones, and they represent the communities within the sand habitat, the degraded reef. Then we have the red and orangey dots. They represent the communities within the artificial reef. And then we have the blue and green dots, which represent the communities within the coral reef. So the 2 main things that we've noticed from this diagram are that the sand habitat, the degraded reef, is very different to the artificial reef and natural reef. And the second is that the artificial reef and the natural reef are quite similar. And this is highlighted from the last statistical analysis I discussed. But more interestingly, we can see the increase in communities over time. So if you look at artificial reef 22, so it's like the light green color, we can see that it's getting more and more similar to the coral reef over time. So basically, this shows that the species living on the artificial reef are becoming more and more similar to the natural reef over the 3-year period. And again, we expect that these communities will become more and more similar over time. So that was a really interesting finding from this research. Yeah. So, can artificial reefs effectively restore degraded reef habitats? Well, the research says yes, it does. And it's quite easy to go diving and snorkeling and have a look and say, hey, wow, these artificial reefs are really diverse. They definitely restore degraded reefs. But it's important for us to have the research on this as well, and the publications which prove the results of our research. So yes, it's great to have that. So we're not only looking at artificial reefs and how they're able to restore degraded reefs, but we're also looking at community involvement in coral conservation as well. Because like I said before, community involvement is especially important. And we wanted to create a research project which looked at this as well, which looked at how and why communities choose to be engaged and involved in coral conservation projects. So basically we interviewed about 75 members of the local community within Tianyar, everything from fishers through to government workers, like Kepala Desa and Polisi, and then education, tourism workers, non-government organization workers, and even students. So we interviewed a wide range of people over a variety of ages and education levels too. And it was really interesting, the results that we found from this research. And we presented our research findings using a theory of planned behavior model. And basically this again looks a bit complicated, but I'll explain it quite simply. It shows the different reasons how and why communities choose to engage in coral conservation projects. So the first is attitudes towards behavioral change. So more simply, that is what persuades local people to be involved in conservation projects. And for the research findings for us were that the development of marine ecotourism is a big point. So many local fishers are choosing to become involved in coral conservation because they want to restore reefs so that they can later become dive guides or work in the tourism industry where they would perhaps have increased incomes. So development of ecotourism is a big reason why people would choose to support coral conservation in their area. Another is perceived changes to the marine environment, and this relates to the second one below it as well, perceived changes in fishing yield. So basically this is a community would choose to support coral conservation because of the benefits arising from conservation in terms of higher fishing yield or more fish biodiversity or more coral biodiversity, which can lead to benefits to them from fishing or again, diving, tourism, things like that. So it's the direct outputs of the coral conservation program. So next is subjective norms. And basically what subjective norms is things that influence people to be involved in conservation programs. So this, a big one is influence of local leaders. So we found it's almost essential to have local leaders involved in coral conservation projects. And this isn't just for our projects, but this has been shown through a lot of research internationally, is that you need to involve local leaders in the project. And this could be in examples of Indonesia, it could be Kepala Desa, head of the village. It could be community leaders. It could be religious leaders. But yes, people like this have a huge influence, and communities generally are very interested in projects if they're persuaded to do it by local leaders like this. Another is formal and informal education. So we found that the more educated people are about a topic, the more likely they are to be engaged in the conservation project. And finally, and quite surprisingly, we found social media to be a big factor influencing people to be involved in coral conservation, specifically Instagram, actually. So many of the people we interviewed said that one of the main reasons why they had chosen to become involved in coral conservation was because they'd seen about the impacts to marine biodiversity on social media, and this really influenced them to become involved in projects and do good for the ocean. So that's really interesting, and that was not what we expected, so we were surprised to find that. And then finally, perceived behavioral control. So basically this is reasons why people might not be involved in coral conservation. So resistance to change. This might be perhaps members of the community that for some reason or another do not want to be involved in a coral conservation project. So this might be political reasons, or what else could it be? Personal reasons, whatever it might be, multiple reasons why people would choose specifically not to be involved in a marine conservation project. Next would be lack of environmental knowledge. So this kind of again comes down to education, and lack of knowledge might lead to somebody not really being aware of the importance of coral reefs or the damage to coral reefs, and as a result, not wanting to be involved in these projects. After this, it's lack of investment for ecotourism and waste management. So again, the community might have a huge desire and a huge interest in supporting marine conservation because they want to develop marine ecotourism. But unfortunately, if there's no investment and no money there for the community, then there might not be much support from the community because they have no way of developing these projects. And finally, but also very important, would be lack of environmental regulation. So the importance of regulation should not be underestimated in terms of developing conservation projects. So for the case of us, it's marine protected area and a no-take zone. These regulations need to be enforced, ideally have government support as well. Yeah, so I hope that was a slightly different and interesting way of explaining why communities might choose to be involved in coral conservation projects. And this is a paper which is of ours, which is in review right now. So fingers crossed, hopefully we should have some another publication on this soon. And finally, I'm getting towards the end of my presentation now, but the last slide is we also have a publication which looks at coral reef conservation in Bali in light of international best practice. So basically we review international best practice in terms of coral reef conservation around the world. So this might be projects in the Great Barrier Reef or South America, wherever it may be. We look at what other projects are doing and what Indonesia and specifically Bali should try to do to follow this best practice. And some of the outcomes of this research showed that we need an increased designation of official marine protected areas. And this links with the second one as well, creating an MPA network. So MPA stands for Marine Protected Area, but ideally within the Marine Protected Area, we would have a no-take zone, an NTZ, which means no fishing allowed within the Marine Protected Area. So we need increased designation of these marine protected areas, and ideally within a network. So when I say a network, I mean a connection of different marine protected areas which are connected in a certain way. So this might be to protect species like sharks, which don't just stay within one area, but which move around a reef. Or it might be to protect a large area of specifically important corals. Whatever it may be, we found that marine protected areas within a network are very important and vastly improve the benefits to marine biodiversity. Next, we have substantially reducing marine plastic pollution. Again, this is something that needs to be done globally by reducing single-use plastics and working with producers to reduce the amount of plastic that is produced. This is vitally important globally. Next, it's continuing artificial reef construction, but within degraded habitats. But artificial reef construction needs to follow artificial reef best practice as well, which you can find within my paper that I've referenced here. But it's really important to follow best practice within artificial reef construction, because you can deploy artificial reefs, but if you don't design them well and put them within the right location, then unfortunately the artificial reefs may not be successful. So it's important to consider multiple factors before you just start putting artificial reefs in the ocean wherever you want. Next is continuing to develop Bali as a marine ecotourism destination. But again, very important to develop it with high ecotourism standards and good management. For example, so that dive guides are educated on teaching their divers to not step on corals and not to destroy corals, but leave no trace and leave the area as they found it and not cause more harms to the corals than good. Because we found that ecotourism can be beneficial to coral conservation projects as long as it's managed correctly. Next is increasing engagement in global science to inform marine conservation decision-making. So global science is changing all the time, and as a result, this is changing our view of coral conservation and what we know to be the best practice. So as coral conservation project managers and people involved in these projects, we need to be engaged in global science, and we need to be open to new ideas and to be open-minded, because science changes and we should be informed by science. So it's very important to do this. And finally, developing more marine monitoring programs. So as I mentioned earlier, quite often projects will deploy artificial reefs or set up a marine protected area, but after that, there's no monitoring. There's no way of knowing how successful or unsuccessful that project is. So every project should have consistent monitoring after it has aim to restore an area of marine area or degraded reef. So yeah, very important to continuing develop marine monitoring programs. So that is the end of my presentation. It would be my pleasure to answer some questions that any of you may have about coral reef conservation management and also coral reef conservation research. Also, these are my contact details, including my email address, website, Twitter, and Instagram. If you would be interested to follow me or to discuss more with me, it would be my pleasure to speak to you on there as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shah. Already one question in the chat room, or you can
I can read it if you, yes. Firstly, I see a message from Pat Yule. Thank you, Pat Yule. The question was, can we take the coral? Yeah, it's a good question. So it depends what reason you're taking the corals for. Sometimes we would take corals from a natural reef and we would take corals that have already been broken but are still alive. We would take them to the artificial reef from the natural reef and transplant them there. So in cases like this, yes, but the area is a marine protected area and the corals are not allowed to be taken out of the water to be sold later. Okay, I have a question from Coral Catch Batch 4. How is the maintenance of the artificial reefs and how is the procedure for the monitoring? Yeah, that's a good question. So we break up our monitoring into two different methods. We monitor mobile populations. So when I say mobile populations, I mean anything that can move around. So fish, fish, turtles, sharks, etc., etc. And we do this mostly by remote underwater video. So I shared that video earlier in my presentation where we're placing a camera and we're counting the species that live there and also their abundance as well. In terms of benthic monitoring, so monitoring corals, mostly we do that through benthic photo quadrats. So we're taking photos of quadrats within the reef and monitoring the coral populations and also benthic populations like sponges, etc., etc. And to do this, we use coral point count, which is a really useful software. So your question was specifically referring to artificial reefs. So actually we do this in all three. We do this within coral reef, artificial reef, and naturally degraded habitat. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I have a question from please.
Okay, please. I'm not.
Yeah. Hello, Zach. My name is Razak. So it's a pleasure to hear your presentation. I have a question. Like from your paper, like there's a significant, like the increase through years, through times, to 2020 to 2022 on the diversity. But it seems like you work, the data is only based on the fish data or also the benthic community, like corals or corals. Because just looking at your photos, there's a lot of fish, but there's not so many corals, like almost none. So I was, is it only based on the fish diversity, fish population, or also other benthics? And yeah, is it only fish?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So yes, we do monitoring on benthic populations as well. It's greatly important to monitor benthic populations as well. The reason I haven't included it in my presentation is because we're working on the publication right now. So I haven't published anything on this yet. But yeah, we are continuing to do monitoring of benthos, specifically corals, and comparing how artificial reef benthic populations compare to coral reef benthic populations. And of course, colonization of fish is going to happen quicker than coral recruitment. And for us, our coral spawning season is November. So we usually find that after November, we will start to get polyps growing on our artificial reefs. And our artificial reefs that are now 5 years old have got nearly 5-year-old corals growing on them. So they're much larger. And then there are artificial reefs that are younger, perhaps deployed in the last year, don't have corals growing on them yet. So it's interesting for us to compare the age of the artificial reef with the new artificial reefs and how they differ in terms of coral growth. So I'm going to share I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second, which is going to show you the difference in communities of our artificial reefs and natural reefs. So 1 second, I'm just getting the diagram up as it's not shared within my presentation.
Okay.
I just share my screen 1 second.
Yes.
Masih mau share screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so this diagram here looks at the difference between artificial reef benthic populations and coral reef benthic populations. So we're not looking at fish here. We're looking at corals, sponges, hydroids, things like that. And again, similar to the last diagram, you can see the difference in color. So there's a big overlap between corals, the coral reef and the artificial reef. And of course, they're not exactly the same. And this is based on 3 years of data. So we can see that there are definitely distinct differences between the artificial reef and the coral reef. And we would expect that after 5 years, because there's no way that a 5-year-old artificial reef can be exactly the same as a natural coral reef. But we're pleased to see that there are starting to be overlaps between what's growing on them. So yeah, as we continue this monitoring program, which we plan to do over the coming years, we would expect that these populations will diverge and become more similar. And we hope within several decades' time, the artificial reef won't look like an artificial reef anymore, and it will hopefully be more similar to a natural coral reef. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to put a like short comments, because I also have seen several photos from the Lini friends, from Bangul or from Nika. And then, like with the roti buaya, they have some coral growth on it, but like from your photos, like there's photo of the 3 years after the deployment of artificial reef, there are a lot of fish, but still no corals. So I was wondering, like, in the northern part of Bali or where you are, probably naturally there's no coral reef there before, with the black sandy subsurf, So might be that probably be the case. Do you find that in certain area, naturally no corals growing in the area, or even though you, but when you put artificial, there will be corals growing on it. You know what I mean? Like if the,
Yeah, I
the
understand.
area have naturally no corals, and if you
Actually, it
enhance,
does.
okay,
Yeah. So actually, the
but
area
not
does
patchy.
have natural coral reefs, and that's one reason why we don't do that much transplantation, is because we do get natural growth of corals without needing to transplant them. So yes, the video I showed you earlier, I think the reefs are 3 years old, and yeah, the camera is quite far away from the artificial reefs as well, so you can't see that much coral growth on it yet, but we would expect that artificial reefs over 3 years old would have maybe between 5 to 6 centimeters of coral growth, and we do see that. So we, in answer to your question, we do have natural recruitment, which is one of the reasons why we can have success in terms of natural coral recruitment.
Cool, great research, Zach. I'm looking forward to read your papers and the published one as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for your
No
support.
worries.
Okay, anyone else? Maybe I have one question, sir.
Okay.
What about the turtle? Before you put the coral reef, yeah, they work before it. What about the turtle, the nest of the turtle from 2017 to now?
Yeah, so your question is, before we started our conservation program, basically before we started our program, we've had turtles nesting on the Tian Yard 3-kilometer beach for nobody knows how long, for a very long time, we would imagine. And unfortunately, when speaking with the local community, it's been discussed that quite a lot of communities take the eggs, and they would often eat the eggs or sell them at the market. Again, boats park on the beach in Tian Yard. So we would find that sometimes the eggs would be squashed by the boats, or even be dug up by dogs. So yeah, unfortunately, before we started our program, there was very little work done to restore and protect the turtle nests. So when we started, one of the main aims for us was to build this habitat, or this protected area. We'd call it our turtle conservation area. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, and then do you only protect it, or you move the nest to the safe area?
Yeah, so the nests are moved, and this is quite interesting because ideally the nest would be left. In an ideal world, we would put something around the nests, perhaps a fence or something to block the nests, but unfortunately we're unable to do that. We don't have the resources to just go around the beach and cover the nests and protect them. Unfortunately, we found that this wouldn't be successful. So the nests are moved, taken to our nest conservation area, where they're released once the nests hatch. So they're all taken to one specific area, which we can protect and survey and make sure that they're not taken from there. Because unfortunately, we don't have the resources to patrol the whole beach and make sure that all nests on the beach are safe. In an ideal world, we would leave the nests and they would be kept where they are. But right now, we're not able to do that, hence why they're taken to our protected area.
Okay, thank you. And then from the class, there is another question.
Which is the question, sorry?
No, there is no question. Only ask the attendance. Okay. No more question? I show you. Okay, if no question, I think it's enough, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Pak Natih,
Yes.
one question.
Okay.
Yeah, Zach, very interesting research, and based on the challenge, I think now it's not only for coral restoration method. Yeah, but the biggest challenge, I think, how to engage the community to support and until the coral reef restore or the related to sustainability. So based on your experience in Bali, yeah, so how can we make engagement with the local? What is the strategy that you do for the make a big engagement and give impact for the community? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really important, like I said throughout the presentation, to engage community in coral conservation, because we found if they're not, then the project will not be successful. And this is not just from my own findings, but research ever has highlighted this importance. So we know that it's greatly important. So yeah, the big question is, how can you do that? So there's a few different methods. And I think specifically if you're working with fisher communities, the important thing is that fishers are aware of the potential benefits that they will gain from conservation of corals. Because if they're not really aware of how they can benefit, then it's not really going to be of interest for them. So the ways that you can do this is by discussing ecotourism and how ecotourism can lead to perhaps higher paid jobs. And many of our locals that we work with used to be fishermen, and now they're trained dive guides working for Paddy, and they're taking a lot of our volunteers out diving, and this is paid work for them, and they're earning a lot more money now like this than they were fishing. So this is really important point to mention, is that the community needs to be aware of the benefits that coral conservation can bring. And this isn't just in terms of ecotourism, but also in terms of changes to the marine environment. So, for example, increases in fishing yield as well. But that has to be well managed, because if you have a coral conservation program that's aimed at increasing fisheries, then that in itself can be problematic, because you're wanting to restore the population. So that needs very careful planning. So that are two of the main ways, is by engaging them in making them aware of the benefits. Also utilizing local leaders. So as I said before, North Bali Reef Conservation, my NGO, my local partner, my co-founder, Pak Ketut, he is essential in our program, because he is a community leader that is bringing communities, especially of fishers, on board to engage them in coral conservation and make them aware and interested in joining these projects. And I think without this local link between global marine science and global marine conservation, it's difficult to say that. I think that would not be successful. So you really need that person that is the link between the community and the global science. And without this, I think that it would not be successful. So yeah, that's also important. What else have I got here?
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, I think that's probably enough. I could talk to you about this all day, but maybe that's that's answering your question for now.
Yes, thank you.
There's a question from Pa Ogi in the chat room.
Okay, it's nice to talk. Do you have plans on developing training for community or others on how to do coral reef conservation? Yeah, that's a good question. Do we have plans to increase training? So actually, we're planning on trying to expand our project around different parts of Bali. We're in the process of expanding our project to Kubu, near Talamban, and we would like ideally to be able to set up different projects around Bali and perhaps Indonesia as well, that aims to do similar conservation work. And as we expand, we aim to increase community training and community development to mobilize more people to restore coral reefs. And yes, so answering your question, yes, we do. It's just a matter of having the money to do it and also the time to set up these projects. But over the next few years, we're aiming to set up more projects, which is aiming to do this. And again, all of these projects will be utilizing international volunteers to bring international volunteers working with local communities to restore reefs. And that's the aim of our organization. So answering your question, yes, we do. And you should follow us on social media if you would like to be updated on that.
Can I ask one last question?
Okay.
Sorry, Zach.
Please do, no problem.
So because you are working on like voluntary base, and I suspect that you're aiming into the sustainability of the program, right? And then when you do reef restoration, do you upscale the area based on, like you have plan for upscaling along with this volunteer, like how many volunteers you come every year, how much money you get from them, and then how much corals you want to expand in terms of restoration effort?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And upscaling is really important for us. And the more funding we get, the more money we get, the more corals we can restore. And this is exactly what we try to do. Throughout COVID, it was really difficult because the border was closed. So we got very little international support for 2 years. And during that time, we were very quiet. But fortunately, in the last year, we've been open again and we're getting more and more support. And this is allowing us to not only restore more corals, but also employ more members of the community to be involved in the program. And like I said, we're in the process of expanding our project to other areas. But at the same time, we're also we're based in Tianyar, which is a very remote area of northeast Bali. It's not like Kuta or Canggu or other tourism areas. And as we're interested in developing ecotourism in these areas, we have to do this very carefully because we don't want it to become the next Kuta or Canggu, and we want the community to directly benefit from the upscaling of the area. So it's very important to us to keep the local tradition and to support the local community in how we do this. So yeah, we are aiming to upscale, but also whilst supporting the community and the fishes and of course the coral conservation at the same time.
Thank you so much, Zach.
Okay.
Any other questions? So whenever any of you are in Bali or wish to visit our program, please do contact me. It would be my pleasure to show some of you our program and for you to see it in person.
So when will you back to Bali?
I think in about 1 month's time, one month's time.
Because every 6 months I go to Bali.
Okay. When do you
maybe next August I will be in Bali.
Great. Yeah, I will be there in August. Please do come and visit us. You can contact me and we can arrange a meeting.
Yes. Any question? Okay, there is no question.
Mungkin komen dari Mbak Ade sebagai kepala sekolah skors.
Okay, Mbak Ade, please.
Yeah, I was supposed to open this session. I'm the headmaster of School of Coral Reef Restoration, and I would like just to say thanks, Zach, for sharing with us. And it's really encouraging to see a solid research happening in Bali, and the fact that we use the result from your research for improvement of the conservation. My other concern is in Indonesia, I think we all need to move more forward into the implementation of the research results into the policy, if possible, So I was very glad that you built the collaboration with local universities and, with the local governments, I'm really looking forward to have some great results from your research to be implemented in Bali and then to the greater part of Indonesia. So like Pak Nyoman, I will be in Bali as well for my research sometimes in July and August. So I'll definitely contact contact you, and talk more about reef restoration and conservation effort on coral reef. So thank you so much, Zach, for sharing with us this afternoon, and good luck with the rest of your stay in the UK and with your PhD as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Mau foto bareng? Everybody.
Oh, iya.
Ayo.
Oke.
Foto.
You take foto
Kameranya
on,
bisa
please.
Siap,
kamera
ready?
on. Jarang-jarang nih. Soalnya nggak pernah
Oh,
ada yang
Bang
kameranya on.
Yul beda tuh dengan fotonya.
Oh, ada RD
Wih,
ya.
Bang Yul langsung beresin rambut.
Salam Libeka, salam Mbak Ade.
Wah, Pak Ogi, ada Pak Ogi.
Pak Ogi. So,
Siap ya.
Bilang Pak Ogi.
Satu, mana Pak Ogi?
dua.
Tiga. One more. Next.
Makin sehat
Satu,
ya.
dua, tiga.
Oke.
Oke, terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much,
Terima
Zach.
kasih.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Bye.
Terima kasih presentasinya, terima kasih semua.
RD,
Bye-bye.
WA.
Oh siap, Li.
Tidak bisa diisi ya.
Bye everyone.
Next.